uplift you and to ready you for your future, okay? Because it's about to get real. I'm just saying. And you know, ladies like me, we need good men. So be that for you and for the future. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you, Victoria. Let's give it up again for Victoria Norton. Thank you. I'm going to ask the panelists, we're going to move on with the panel. I know we have some time commitments, and if you'd all take your seats, I'm going to introduce the panel. I intend for this to be engaging. I know that I'm going to start with Charlita Tavares. Many of you know her because she's a part of our community. And Charlita's our senator and CEO of Primary One Health Center. We also have on the panel today Herschel Craig, State Representative Craig. You all know him. He's a tireless worker in our community as well. Grew up not too many blocks from here, as did I. Herschel, thank you for being here. We have Art James, who is a senior policy advisor, an expert on infant mortality, not just here in the state of Ohio, but nationally. He's the co-director of Ohio Better Birth Outcomes and the Collaborative Prevent Infant Mortality. And also we have with us Dr. Charles Wheeler couldn't be here with us representing the Neighborhood House. We have Dorian Wingard here joining us today to bring us greetings and information representing the Neighborhood House. I have some questions. I think most of us are well aware of the issue of infant mortality. I'm going to first allow Charlita Tavares to say a few words. I respectfully know that she has another commitment on opening of one of our libraries today, so I'm going to let her go first. With this in mind, Charlita, I did want to pitch a question to you that earlier this year, the Governor Kasich signed a bill into effect, House Bill, I think it took effect May 23rd. And it slashed $1.3 million from Planned Parenthood. And certainly that not only affected Planned Parenthood, and it might have been focused toward trying to address the issue of abortion rights, but it also slashed many of our programs potentially, such as Healthy Moms and Healthy Babies, which were effectively helping to reduce infant mortality. I guess one of my questions is, do we truly have a bipartisan effort in reducing infant mortality, and what are some of the things that are being done to address infant mortality from the legislature?
Thank you very much, Dr. Parker.
Is that on?
Thank you very much, Dr. Parker, and to the men of Kappa Alpha Psi, and certainly to those who have joined us this morning to talk about this important topic. The bill that you're referencing with respect to Planned Parenthood, it's having right now it's on hold. Fortunately, we have a judge that has understood that there are some aspects of the bill that are unconstitutional. It's taking money away from those Planned Parenthood services across the state of Ohio. Planned Parenthood provides many health services for men and women, whether it's comprehensive health care for women, whether it's testing for men, STD testing, primary care services. They are in many communities where we don't have physicians, where we don't have health care facilities, many of the rural communities throughout the state. So it's on hold at this point in time with respect to how those monies can be diverted to other organizations. However, the issue is critical. We need as many health care providers in the state stepping forward and providing care to the uninsured in our community. We're going to have fewer babies living if their moms cannot get the prenatal care that they need. Dr. Parker talked about the collaborative that he and his managed care organizations have to do the education around safe sleep, to provide education around cultural competency, which is a very important aspect of reducing unnecessary deaths of our African American babies. Now, I want to share my thoughts with respect to what we're doing in a bipartisan way. We have a legislator that I have worked with since about 2011, 2012, on this whole notion of health disparities in the state of Ohio. It is a Republican colleague, a woman out of the Warren County area, the Cincinnati area, who has worked with me as a Republican on reducing infant mortality. We've worked collaboratively. Now, she is not pro-choice. In fact, we are on opposite ends of the abortion rights issue. But on this issue, we work together, and we've passed significant pieces of legislation. But what I want to reinforce is that it takes all of us. It can't just be the two legislators lifting up the issues, because we have lots of people working against us, including some who don't want cultural competency training to be required by all health professionals. There are some that believe they just get it through osmosis. There are some that believe because they have certain credentials that they don't need cultural competency training. That is in fact not true, and that's why we have some of the unintended consequences. I don't believe they're intended, but they are because they don't know what they're doing. So we want our physicians, our nurses, our social workers, our psychologists, psychiatrists, everyone that is touching us in any way to have cultural competence training on an ongoing basis so that we respect those that are coming in our door. It is like customer service on steroids. It's understanding who your customer is, your patient, your client coming in the door, so that you provide the most appropriate care for that individual. You're understanding who they are, you're respecting who they are, you're not trying to change them, you're trying to collaboratively work with that patient or client in order to get the best health outcomes. Now, the legislature has adopted quite a few pieces of legislation. I do want to talk about my colleague, Representative Craig, because he served on the Ohio Infant Mortality Commission with me, along with Dr. James, who has been an inspiration and certainly that expert that we needed in the state of Ohio. The commission has come up with 50 recommendations, and we have placed all of those recommendations to reduce infant mortality in the state into one bill. It's Senate Bill 232 that Senator Jones and I are sponsoring. Representative Craig and Representative Coonsey were the other two legislative members of that commission who are going to be working to ensure that all of those recommendations are carried forth. One of the pieces that's included in Senate Bill 232 is the issue of cultural competence and the required training for health professionals. So I would ask you to be with us, to advocate with us, to educate the rest of the community on how important this is so that we can ensure that our babies live. And then finally, I just want to give a shout out to my organization, Primary One Health, who has a table over here. They're here because we want you to learn as much as you can about primary care that's available to anyone within the community who has no insurance, some insurance, or insurance. It's for everyone, homeless individuals. We see everyone, and we want you to know that we want to be your first choice for quality care. I've got a great team over there. We partner with the Ohio or the Columbus Public Health Department, Dr. Teresa Long, who is our health commissioner, who is standing right over here. To the right, raise your hand, Dr. Long. The city of Columbus is unique in the country. There are very few cities that put money into primary care and who have put money into primary care since the early 70s. And so that's an important step here in Central Ohio. And then the other collaborative partner that we've been working on this whole area of reducing infant mortality is Celebrate One. And I did see, thank you very much, we have Celebrate One and I just lost her name. Leanne Eagle. Leanne Eagle. Leanne is a wonderful partner. Celebrate One is really focusing in on that 0 to 1 age, and they are collaborating with healthcare providers, social service agencies, all kinds of faith-based organizations so that we can educate about the ABCs of safe sleep and connecting women who are pregnant to the services that are available to them with step one, which is that connection to finding a primary care provider. So I want to thank Leanne Eagle and her team for being here as well. And then finally, I just want to reinforce how important Dr. Parker is, and certainly this initiative with Kappa Alpha Psi is in our community. We need dads, as the speaker said earlier. We need fathers to be a part of raising their children, ensuring that their children live past 1 year of age. There is one other bill that I want you to write down, and as African American men, this is critically important. Whether you're married to the mother of your children or not, whether you're divorced from the mother of your children or not, we need stable conditions for our children. We have a bill, Senate Bill 30, it's called the Family Stability Bill. It's passed out of the Senate. It's over there in the House of Representatives. And this is going to ensure that we have all of those other supports, those social determinants, so our children can live past the age of 1 and have the dad and the mom there supporting the children, whether they're in the same household or not. Understanding what dads need in order to support their children, understanding what moms need, but most importantly, understanding what a child needs in order to live, grow, and be healthy. Thank you very much again to the Kappas for all that you're doing. We look forward to continuing to work with you. And I apologize that I do have to.
Thank you so much. We applaud the work that you do, and it's so grateful to have you here this morning and being respectful of your time. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to ask Art James a question. Art, we certainly know that awareness, as I mentioned earlier, was very important relative to raising awareness in the community. Do you think that we've gotten to a point at this juncture where it's being recognized as an issue in the African American community? And where do we need to go with that?
So my brief answer to that is no. That I don't think all of us in the African American community are aware of the significance of this problem relative to us. And I don't think that we appreciate the kind of stuff that we can do to make a significant difference in terms of the opportunities that our babies have to survive the first year. So putting the numbers that Dr. Parker introduced us to earlier, if you take all states, Ohio is number 7 for the number of babies born in a state every year. So we are in the top 10 of states for the number of babies that a state delivers every year. But we're in the bottom 10 for the opportunity that we provide to our babies to survive the first year of life. That's overall everybody. That's white babies, that's black babies, and that's Hispanic babies. As recently as the year 2011, the state of Ohio was the worst state in the United States for a black baby to be born. The worst. There are a lot of things that we can do to help make that better. You're going to get involved in safe sleep training today. That's the focus of what the Kappas are trying to help us with, trying to teach us. But it starts even before that. We are the highest group, those of us who are black, are the highest group in this country and in this state to have women who get pregnant when they didn't intend to, unintentional pregnancies. And unintentional pregnancies are associated with a higher incidence of compromised birth outcome, including preterm birth. So let me just break this down as best I can for those of us in our community. In nature, intercourse, having sex, is intended for reproduction, to have babies. Human beings are the only mammals, and as far as I know, the only animals under God's blue sky who have the opportunity to be sexually involved and not reproduce because we have contraception available to us. But often we don't use it. Men and women have to accept that responsibility. Avoid pregnancy if you don't intend to have a child as a consequence of the intercourse that you are having. Once we become pregnant, get in for prenatal care early. We also, those of us who are African American, leave the country for initiating prenatal care late, and it compromises the clinical facility's ability to successfully escort you through pregnancy, labor, and delivery. Once the baby is here, the safe sleep, we promote breastfeeding. There are a lot of other things that we can improve. But if we start with just those two things, being aware of the data and then not getting pregnant when we don't intend to get pregnant, we're going to improve our numbers significantly. Here's the other thing that I want to make sure folks understand. Where black babies are concerned, where the opportunity for black babies in this state to survive, the black community has to step up. We can't keep depending on other people to fix this for us. This is our responsibility. And I have this dream. For all the faults, all the negative stuff that you hear people talking about regarding black men, how powerful would it be for a substantial collective of black men to stand up and say, no more relative to this high rate of death for our babies. That we're not going to accept it anymore. That we know things can be done. That biologically, our babies don't die for many reasons different than white babies die, yet our babies die at 2.5 times the rate that white babies die in our state. Now, some of that is because of the kind of stuff that happens at the top that Senator Tavares was just talking to you about, but she's on that case, and those are changes that we're trying to make in the state. That's at the top. But at the bottom, where the rubber meets the road, it's you and I. And we got to stand up for our children. We got to stand up for our babies. Black men, we have to stand up for our women. And we have to, as a community, be willing not only to know the kind of stuff that Senator Tavares and all of the other legislators are trying to work on, but we also have to support them to make sure that stuff gets pushed through.
Thank you, Art. Following up on those comments about the community responsibility, and I'll pitch this to you, Representative Craig, that the governor said that, we've kind of made progress when it comes to infant mortality. The majority rate has come down somewhat with our efforts, but we have to strike a balance between his comments that the black community has to do better. It almost seemed to indicate that he implied that there may be something wrong with us. And I think we have to, how are we challenged to balance that message to say we have to take accountability, but he kind of disregarded the impact of the social determinants of healthcare as well as racism and the other things that impact the community. So my question to you, Representative Craig, is how do we balance that message to the community, as Art alluded to, relative to taking accountability for our own people?
The book of Micah lifts this query, raises this interrogation. What does the Lord require? The message comes back to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before the Lord. I would refute the governor's assertion, but not all of it. But certainly in terms of what we're doing legislatively, and that's why you want people you vote people in the office, to make certain that they have a set of core values that's important to you. It is clear and we talked about it. I grew up not far from here. My mother came here as a live-in maid. And the reality is I would not be sitting here today without her and all of those folks. Many of them did not have professional degrees that deposited so much in my life and contributed so much to me. And so it was those folks that deposited into my life that helped me to grow and develop. But in that legislature, as my esteemed colleague, Senator Tavares has said, we've got to make sure that we're clear about those things that are important, certainly to the African American community, and our children and our families, and all children, but certainly we need to be clear and not apologize for it in terms of those things that are important. Those social determinants of poverty. Now, Dr. James, who I respect enormously, in fact, he is a preeminent leader in this area. It was brought to Ohio because of this staggering, very troubling issue with infant mortality to help us do something about that. And so from the clinical standpoint, I'm a father, a grandfather, and great-grandfather. We know what our responsibilities are as men. We've got to make sure that we're supporting our families and our children. And that's categorically clear. We better do that. We must do that. But the social determinants of poverty, you look around this area, and it troubled me, and I saw where Muhammad Ali had passed. And certainly I wept this morning because here was a brother that took a risk in everything, cost him everything, to stand up for the things that he believed. And there's going to come a point in your life where you're going to have to stand up and fight for the things that's important to you. And so the social determinants of poverty, we've got to make sure that our families and children are whole and have the kinds of food, not the food deserts that we have in this community. Where, as I was a kid, we had Carl Brown's down the corner. We had other stores. In fact, because of segregation in this community, we had doctors and lawyers that were in this community. My mama was cleaning houses, but I could go down the street to Dr. Roseman because we couldn't afford a doctor, but he would take us in. And so we got to make sure that we're looking at that issue of poverty. And even in the city of Columbus, I served on Columbus City Council for over 8 years. I'm certainly proud of the work we have done there. But what so troubles me now is that we have this index of poverty that continues to rise. It's a yin and a yang, and we've got to very much pay attention to that. I'm not just talking, not just hyperbole, because I live in the central city. And I'm watching and observing it, and want to make sure that no matter where our children are, because genius does not have a zip code, we got to make certain that our children are getting everything that they need to be successful. So in answer to your question, push us, hold us accountable as legislators to make sure that we're talking about the kinds of things that are important to our community. That's making sure that we have the kinds of jobs where people can provide for their families. This issue of poverty is strangling our communities. We want to make sure that we have the kind of housing that's important to our families and our children. And certainly with this issue of infant mortality, I must thank the men of Kappa Alpha Psi, these brave men of courage on this issue around fatherhood that have stepped forward to put this issue on the forefront. Because men, we have a significant place to play in here. And we got to be accountable to God to the work that we're doing for our families and our children.
Thank you, Brother Greg. Thank you very much. Brother Wingard, I want to ask you that there are a number of initiatives that are underway. Many of the initiatives around infant mortality, as you are aware, are centered and directed toward women. And while those initiatives are very important, certainly you've recognized that Kappa Alpha Psi has taken on the issue of father involvement and the importance of fathers. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the community-based initiatives relative to engagement of fathers and how how you are impacting young African American men to be engaged in this whole issue of reducing infant mortality.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's
Good
going to be a
morning.
still morning. First off, before I jump into answering that question, I want to go ahead and say a few things about the neighborhood house specifically, and offer regrets on this part of Mr. Wheeler, Pastor Wheeler, who intended to be here this morning, but he ended up having to eulogize a friend of his, and he sends his regrets. And when he gave me a call yesterday afternoon and asked me if I would come in his stead, it was an unequivocal yes. And as a result of just hearing these conversations, I hate being on panels with state representative, my pastor friend down here, because it's hard to follow him when he gets fired up. You know, the neighborhood house itself, and I don't know how many of you know this, and if I'm being redundant, please excuse me. But the neighborhood house itself is an organization that is part of a network of settlement houses that is a national network and a state network, and it is, I think, one of the oldest, marking about 106 years worth of service in this community. Didn't know if that was a level of awareness in this community, in this room right now. The other side of that, to speak to the question, is the initiatives that the neighborhood house facilitates cover a large spectrum of services, and the backdrop to all of those services addresses those social determinants of health, those social determinants of poverty, and are designed to enhance family stabilization. And so when we look at that menu as it relates to early childhood education, as it relates to outpatient care for addiction services and therapy, as it relates to health care and some of the expansive concepts or ideas that Mr. Wheeler and his team are working on, it is very clear that the intent is to stabilize or support the stabilization of the entire family. The idea of emphasizing public policy and community activity as it relates to infant mortality is a brilliant idea, brilliant concept. It is needed. It is something that has been long overdue. We know the stories, we know the statistics. It has its role, as do other elements of what it is that go in support of or go to support those issues of poverty. It cannot exist in a vacuum. So everyone has that role to play. We've talked about the role of our elected officials and of our healthcare professionals. Organizations like the Neighborhood House, organizations like the Columbus Urban League, organizations like some of the initiatives that operate out of the Franklin County Children's Services area, organizations like the Columbus City Schools and what they do in their areas to help promote and support positive fatherhood are those things that are essential to what it is we do. The other side of that is, as a father, I am a father of two and a grandfather of one, and I just found out, Representative Craig, that I'm about to be a grandfather of two more. So I'm still recovering from that news from yesterday. But in that, I think we have to be careful about the stereotypes that float around. I have a pretty decent sphere of interaction and influence with the folk that I know. I don't know a lot of fathers who aren't fathers. I don't know a lot of fathers who aren't fathers. I know more men who look like me who are fathers than I know who are not. And when I hear those statistics, I always cringe because it reminds me of the earlier stat that we just talked about with regard to poverty indexes continuing to increase. Unemployment indexes continuing to increase. But at the same time, economic development is at an all-time high in this city. Something's counterintuitive to those two tiers of statistics. So as we talk about needing to elevate the conversation, we have to do that. We must do that. It's essential that we do that. But we also need to do a lot of other things that go along with that. Senator Tavares talked about a bill, Senate Bill, I think it was 232, that lists 50 different recommendations that go along with addressing the infant mortality issue. What we cannot allow to happen, Representative Craig, with that piece is for what happened some 10 years ago with the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Education. They came back with about 20 to 25 recommendations, started to piecemeal implementation of 1, 2, or 3 of them, and the whole thing fell apart. It's a comprehensive approach. You cannot address infant mortality without education, without awareness, without sustained, consistent, comprehensive addition of resources and access to resources, without cultural competency training, without job education training, without stable housing, without employment training that is sustainable. All of these things go along with it. It's not just a one part, one piece puzzle. It doesn't exist that way. We have to work in tandem with all of each other in this room and with all the organizations in the city. I applaud everything that I've heard. We have to continue to work together. We all have a role to play. We all have a role to play. We need to continue to focus on that and be fearless in it. A lot of times we tend to be apologetic about our engagement. The Neighborhood House is unapologetic about its emphasis on wanting to support family stabilization in the urban core. Period. End of sentence. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have had a very high-level discussion about some bills and legislation, things that we can do on a policy level. But I want to bring it back home with a couple things. And one is, what can you do? What can we all do here in this room? These gentlemen represent much of what we want to see accomplished in our community. But I want to get back to some very sobering things. I mentioned that 1/3 of all these infant deaths are a result of unsafe sleep practices. To that end, today we have an opportunity to participate in a training program and learn about the ABCs of safe sleep. You may call it low-hanging fruit, but this is where we can all, each of you out there, can have an impact in your homes, in your churches, in your communities, by some very simple things. I'm not going to steal the thunder of those that are here today to talk about the ABCs of safe sleep. A, alone. B, on your back. And C, in a safety-approved crib. You'll hear more about that messaging later. But this is something that each and every one of you can do. And we have some troubling challenges even within, particularly in the African American community, as we try to message even that. We have that challenge with our mothers, our grandmothers, and everybody else that said, well, you all slept together and you slept on your stomach and you got here and it wasn't any problem. Like I always say about premature babies, they don't put that premature miracle baby on the front page. They don't put the ones that die on the front page. They put the ones that survive. So you don't hear about all the time about those that we lose. So it's very important, it's a very tangible message that we want to get here today about what each and every one of you can do in your own homes, in your own churches, in your own communities. If you find you will find that there's literature on the ABCs of safe sleep and those sorts of things. We have some breakout sessions today with some guest speakers that I see Maurice Claret here speaking to the Fatherhood Initiative. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you for being here. And I want to close with comments from each of the panelists. Next steps. What do we do next? And Herschel, we'll start with you. Give us 2 minutes on what do we do next.
Well, the first thing is, I want to thank you, Dr. Parker. This is not an esoteric experience. This is real. If you don't take anything else away from here, 2 times the rate of other children, 2 times the rate of other children, our African American children are dying. So again, you've already said it. It's education. It's making sure that you're communicating the education broadly to our families and our children. And certainly take on the personal responsibility to work and mentor our children and our families. So we've got a lot to do. I think legislatively we're going to be looking at the kinds of things that Senator Tavares has talked about, passing from the Senate to the House. I'll be following that very closely, not only following it, but introducing legislation on our side regarding this issue. In fact, I took a representative from the other side of the aisle into my community, which has a high rate of infant mortality, so that she could physically see the constructs, but then begin to do the work. So we've got legislatively, we've got work to do. We'll continue to work with you. We don't want to do this work in a vacuum or a silo. We'll continue to talk with you about this issue.
Thank you, Brother Craig. Art?
I want to echo some of the comments that have already made, first by paying tribute to you for the long number of years that you've been a leader in this community in this regard. Tribute to the brothers of Kappa for the tremendous effort, not just in this community, but nationwide, and the impact that that's going to have. I also don't want to forget to pay tribute to Kimberly Dent, who is the State of Ohio's Commissioner on Fatherhood. There's one other really important piece that I think those folks in the room need to understand. Often we hear things like we've been talking about this morning, that black babies die in the state of Ohio at 2.5 times the rate of white babies, or that as recently as 2011, the rate of black infant mortality in our state was higher than any other state. And you put that together with all of the other junk we hear about us, that our graduation rates are lower, our poverty rates are higher, our incarceration rates are higher. And sometimes we are at risk of believing that there is something wrong with us that accounts for this stuff. So I want to make it clear this morning that there is nothing wrong with you. We have to clearly understand that. And where infant mortality is concerned, in incorporating that truth, understand that your babies are just as capable as anyone else's babies of surviving the first year of life. Often when I have the opportunity to speak to an audience who looks like you, one of the things that I want to make sure you understand, at least from me, is that if I died right now and God offered me the chance to come back and live my life all over again, I beg and I plead to come back in the same skin I'm in. Because in my time, we were just that special.
Well, you did it to me again. The question, it has so much depth to me because of the complexity, I think, of a lot of the challenges. But I will say this. First and foremost, thank you again to the members of Kappa Alpha Psi for hosting this. But for me, I've spent the past almost 25 years focused in education, criminal justice, and human services policy. And the nexus between all three of those points. And wherever there have been deficiencies or challenges within our community, they center around those three areas. And from a public policy standpoint, I was just sharing with one of the neighborhood house staff, Ms. Barbara Clark over here, who I just called her out while she was talking to somebody else and she didn't hear me. But I was just sharing with her that it would be amazing to see, and Representative Craig, you can probably testify to this too, or witness to this too. It would be amazing to see this type of crowd at a House hearing or a Senate hearing on any of these public policy issues. I worked at the State House for a while. I've never seen this kind of crowd in any of those hearing rooms representative of these types of issues. But we consistently are in spaces like this, and it's a good thing. But from a public policy standpoint, to answer the question with regard to what we can do, is to pay attention to the impact that public policy has on our lives from zero to the end. It's relevant all the way through, to be aware of what's going on. It never concerned me really about what got passed. What concerned me was about what got introduced that never got to the hearing room that was crazy. So what we have to do is be aware of those things, support those things, support our legislators, support our city council folk, challenge them to do better, challenge them to be better, hold them accountable. I shared with a colleague of mine about a year ago, I challenged them to point to a piece of legislation or policy that was comprehensive and sustained that improved the quality of life of African Americans in this city. I'll wait. No answer, crickets. But we have to require that. We have to expect that. We have to demand that fearlessly and unapologetically. That is our role, to be aware, to be active, to be engaging. We don't have any excuses. And like my brother just said, I wouldn't want to do anything else other than what I'm doing and be who I am. That's relevant to this, and we need to have pride in that, and it's okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, thank you. If you would bear with me for 2 more minutes, one of the things that we talked about, I want to acknowledge, sorry about that. I want to acknowledge the Kappa leaders that are here. We're talking about getting up on a Saturday morning, African-American young men that are engaged with our organization to be better people and to learn from other brothers. So I want them all to stand up. I want them all to stand up. These are our stars and future leaders. These are the stars and future leaders of our community. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I want to thank all our panelists, Charlene Tavares, who had to leave, our panelists, Mr. Wingard, Art James, Brother Craig. I want to thank you, and you all join me in thanking them for being here this morning. And at this time, we're going to close with the video.
Can we ask for questions? Can it be a 5-minute question and answer?
Certainly, if we have time, I'm going to ask you to remain, and certainly if there are those in the audience that have a question, if you want to come forward to the mic, we'd be happy to take a question. Any questions that might? There is a question. Dr. Janice Bowen does not need a mic. James, Dr. Janice Bowen James, forgive me. Hopefully you heard the question. You can repeat
I
it.
did. Thank you so much for that question. You know, when we're having hearings at the State House, and I know that people work and they're busy, but based upon your availability, that would be very helpful when we're having hearings at the State House to come and express your view about this. Let those legislators know your sentiments and how important it is. And if you can't get down to the House, please make sure you're contacting my office by phone or by other correspondence to let me know what your feelings are. That's an extremely important question, because that's what and how legislators respond to issues. When they get these phone calls or they get letters in the mail, believe me, they pay attention to that. So again, we want to be accountable to you. That's an extremely important question. We want to be doing the kind of work that you can be proud of. Certainly, we may not always agree on all things, but I guarantee you, these really important, relevant issues like this, we want to hear from you because we vote on those issues. And I think Mr. Darian talked about it. When we take those votes on the floor of the House, and sometimes, you know, we take those votes alone, but we're going to fight, and often folks talk about there's about 13 African Americans that I'm the vice president of the Ohio Legislative Black elected officials. There are 13 of us. There are 99 members in the House. But we're going to fight, and so and certainly respond to issues that's important to you. Thank you so much for that question.
I think Mr. Walsh has another question. Go ahead.
I just want to add something to what Representative Craig just said to us. 13 out of 99. We encourage our black folks to run for office, to get in office, and then once they're there, we regularly do not support them. I would liken it to this, that during the course of an election, we hold them up, dress them up in a real fancy looking pork chop suit, and then we throw them into the lion's den. And if we're not there to support them, then we're not doing our job. So we have to show up. We have to make him and the other 12 that are there feel like they got us covering their back, because they're fighting every day to try to cover ours.
Thank you, thank you. I think Brother Alice, do you have a question?
Well, probably but what is happening is infant mortality is so important because it is a fatal wound to a human being. But the things that is happening to that child, all of them don't die. There's something where in that process they're being wounded, and it begins to have an effect on the rest of their lives. So what I was wondering is whether or not the link between what we're trying to do about preventing death, we will also apply to making sure that the child is healthy so that they have a future life. And there should be a link between those two activities, saving its life and giving it a life.
I agree with you 100%. Understand this about infant mortality, that the infant mortality rate is a measure of the quality of life for the group that rate is for. So when we say that the black infant mortality rate as recently as 2011 was the worst in the country, that ain't just talking about the rate at which black babies die. That's talking about the quality of black life in this state. And you know, originally from California, so I'm gonna talk about y'all for just a second, because sometimes as black folks in this state, we tolerate too much, and it's time to stop this stuff and stand up. During the period of time from March of 2014 to March of 2015, when Black Lives Matter was making their big movement, during that period of time, there were 15, nationwide, 15 black folks who were shot, unarmed, shot and killed, or in some other way killed by police. 15 nationwide. We heard about all the stuff that went on in Ferguson. We heard about all the stuff that went on in Baltimore. There were more black folks in that group of 15 who died in the state of Ohio than any other state. And what did we say? What did we do? Where were we? Why was it that it was a big deal in Ferguson, but it was okay here, even though we had a higher concentration die here than in any other place? So we gotta grow some kahunas and stop allowing this stuff to go on in our community.
And what I will add to that is absolutely right. You know, between Tamir Rice and Cleveland, and I mean, I'm scared to shop at Walmart now. To this day, real talk. But to expand on the point that Mr. Alders was making, the element of trauma in our community is immense. And a lot of times, from a behavioral health standpoint, we don't address it. We don't give it the just due that it deserves as it relates to how it impacts teaching and learning opportunities in our schools, how it impacts interaction within our neighborhoods. We have folk walking around with post-traumatic stress disorder on levels that mirror from low to extreme on a daily basis. And the medications that go along with that, and the lack of behavioral health interventions that should occur that aren't occurring, and then those that do occur without the cultural competency skill that Senator Tavares spoke to earlier today. And so at the end of the day, it's a very complex issue because it speaks to quality of life. It speaks to what your life expectancy can be. It speaks to how, in fact, disease may engage you in poor diet and access to this, that, and the other. We have to grow a pair and speak to the specifics that are relevant to total quality of life. I just want to make sure I added that element there.
Thank you, thank you. One more comment.
Let me thank Mr. Olds, because I know he's been in our community for many, many years and has been a fighter, and we certainly need to acknowledge him. we need to do that. But here's what I have to say on that issue. It really is the continuum of care. And let's make no mistake about that, because many of those issues that we're voting for about life, and those that care so much about life, and yet on that other end of it, are not supporting the kinds of things that help to empower people to have life. We're struggling all of the time. And I'm living in a community, my wife and I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night hearing gunshots, where there are women and there are children and there are seniors. We got Ferguson and those issues with the police, and we got to deal with that. I want to deal with these young men that are sitting back there, and those children will go home from school and make it from school, and be able to live. And so we're struggling with those issues, and we've got to make certain that we're doing all that we can to make sure that our children and families have quality of life. Somebody said hard things are hard things. And we've got to make it up in our minds that we're going to fight those issues with the police. And we're going to fight those issues. But we're going to make sure that our children will have life. And we're going to do that in every way that we can. God bless you. Thank you for being here.
Your attendance here today and the level of engagement we had has certainly confirmed what an important issue this is, and I applaud you all for that. It's such an engaging issue, we could go on and on and on. But in the nature of time and being respectful of the others that are here today, I want you all to, again, give everyone on the panel a round of applause. Thank you. And at this time, gentlemen, you can be excused. We're going to play that video to wrap up.